And finally, imagination. It has two locks on it because that's how hard it is to get into. And really, this is when you can start combining and recombining a lot of these things that you have been studying before. And you're also combining those with a lot of research, a lot of different ideas that you're coming up with. Why I'm saying this is that I want to steer you away from the idea that imagination is just something that comes out of you and you have to keep yourself isolated or away from outside influences. I really think that imagination is something that is more akin to responding to something, to recombining things, to taking something that's you might have an opinion or an idea about, and then you combine that with something that's in the real world. And the reason for that is that the real world really has far more weirder things that I think any one person can come up with. If you start digging into any one thing deeply enough in the real world, you'll find that it actually is connected to some sort of insanity in terms of how we're supposed to understand it. I mean, if you just think about the fact that we live on a rock that has water and dinosaurs and helicopters and all of these things that have lived here, have been here, we have no idea where we're going. We're circling around this giant fireball and there's this universe that we don't understand, and a massive percentage of that is made up of dark matter that we don't know what it is. So we're a fraction, we're like smaller than an atom in this massive cosmos, in this massive ocean that we don't even understand. I mean, can you come up with anything that's even as weird as that? Or if you start looking into one particular thing, if you zoom in deeply enough and you start looking at what we're actually made of, and that we're this basically symbiotic organism, that we have bacteria on us that does things for us, like in our stomachs, and then we have these brains that grow and these muscles and we heal. Like, what kind of craziness is that? That's like a superpower that we just regenerate and we learn things, we adapt, we run better than horses over long distances, and we ourselves are crazy creatures, right? You put people in anywhere in the world and then they'll just start adapting. Our brains change. We essentially have evolution within our lifetime. And then not only that, but our bodies change as well. We have brown fat and other types of fat that we will just change our body composition in order to survive wherever you put us. It's crazy. You put an animal where it doesn't belong, it has very slim chances of survival. You put a human somewhere and then you have a McDonald's within like 10 years. And sci-fi and robots and technology and Elon Musk. I mean, does any of this stuff get any weirder than that? So ultimately, use whatever it is that works for you. If being in isolation and just working on your ideas with no outside influence, if that's better, then absolutely do that. But if the results that you're wanting are not there, then do try and do some more research, get some reference before you start sketching, before you do anything. And do some sketching. Don't just start into your final and don't just jump into the end result. Take some time, explore some things, try many different variations. A lot of times the discovery is within the trying of all of these different multiple things that could possibly be happening. Anytime that you redraw something, you're essentially creating an evolution of that one thing that you're drawing, and each and every one gets a little bit more subtle, a little bit more particular, a little bit more refined. So a lot of imagination is in the practice, is in the actual doing, and it's also in the process. I'd like to talk about process here for a moment, and why I'm trying to stress so much the use of reference and of not just trying to do things out of your head as a beginner especially. It's important to understand that the ability to make something out of your head really relies on a massive amount of training that would have gone into your work beforehand. If you're watching someone just do something without any reference, without showing you that they're drawing from something, it's very highly likely that they've either drawn that many times before, or they're so experienced that they can just on the fly create something that they've seen before, or is a combination of many different things that they have done. I think a lot of beginners are just trying to make things out of their head, and I certainly fell into that same trap. I think a very large reason for that is that often on YouTube and on videos, we just get to see someone do something just on the screen. We don't necessarily get to see any preparation. We don't know what they've done right before they've recorded their video. We have no idea if there's a second screen. If it's just a video with music, you have no idea what's around this person. They may have drawn the same thing 100 times before they've drawn it for the video. So they could have rehearsed it, they could have done it many times. It could be just the one thing, let's say, that they are possibly good at drawing. So there's so many things that you don't know when you're watching something. So if we fall in that same trap into thinking that we're just supposed to be making things out of our heads, it could be a very time-consuming hole, basically, that you fall into. A lot of the top professionals and really artists throughout the ages have always gone through a very elaborate process of just figuring out exactly what it is that they're trying to do. when you're doing something from imagination, you have an idea about what you would like something to be, but really in order to create it, you need to go back. And if it's something that we're all familiar with that exists in the world, if you're making a scene, for instance, and you would like a particular time of day or a particular atmosphere, really you need to go and just look at those things. You need to research them. You can't just draw something or paint it if you've never seen it before. Or if you have, but you haven't really paid attention and studied to exactly what makes it look a certain way, what gives it its mood, what makes it remarkable. Without examining these things closely, you really can't communicate them. Really, again, art is very much visual communication. We're trying to visually communicate ideas to someone. So if we haven't studied these things deeply, then really we have no good way of communicating them. You want to stack the odds in your favor. With something as difficult and elaborate and complex as art, really you want to have as many problems as possible solved for you beforehand so that you can really focus on being creative, on really focus on being imaginative, rather than being sabotaged by all the tiny little things that aren't even important to your message, but because they're poorly conveyed, because we just don't know how to go about creating these images, these small things end up ruining the entire bigger impression of your image, of your idea. So I have a couple of images here from Wojtek Fuss, and you can see this is one of them, and this is the top one. So I'll just have you take a look. Now, these are imaginative. They don't necessarily exist, but they're a combination of many things that do exist. And these images, before they came to this final stage, they weren't just started here and ended. It wasn't just this one sitting down, beginning to end, and doing everything without looking, without just purely being imaginative, this downloading of information from somewhere. It didn't happen this way. These things were planned beforehand. Richard Schmidt calls it committing a premeditated murder, a premeditated crime. You want to be meticulous with your planning. That's what Richard Schmidt says about this same preparation of planning and execution. You have to be deliberate when you're doing these things. You can't just go in and pray for a good result, because even if you do get it here and there, it's unreliable. We need to create consistently. So these same images, they were started with an idea in mind. So this was probably just an exercise that the artist wanted to set for themselves, a little challenge. So you can see there's reference for the lighting, and this lighting would be responsible for the mood. It will be responsible for the sky, for the atmosphere. And you also have reference here for the setting, for the design. What are the different elements that are going to make up these images? And you can see all the different types of rock, of lava, of all these things that might be part of their final image. So they had an idea for something, then they went and researched what things in the real world go along with their idea. They also found not just those things that go along with them, but also what mood, what time of day. All of those things are very helpful, because it would be very difficult to come up, let's say, with a scenario like this, with trying to come up with this very complex form, all of these things that are happening here. I mean, the clouds, the different layerings of clouds, all of these things would be very difficult to come up with. And look at the variety of shapes that can happen, the variety of configurations just of the clouds and of the atmosphere, rain, etc. This is very complicated. So if we haven't studied these things, if we haven't spent much time thinking about them, it's really helpful to go out there, do some research, find interesting things, and stick to your idea if that's very important to you, but also enrich it with these things that you can find. So the next stage, this may have started first with sketching, then going and finding out some things. It could be that they might go for inspiration first and then do some sketching from these things. Either way, here's then some sketches and just different ways that these ideas could be presented. So you can see this first sketch and this one were picked. So you can see this started off as a very simple line drawing. So these things progressively go from more basic to more complex. So line drawing, going over here to then a value composition, having these different layerings that will create distance, that will create the design of the image. And then after that is the process of the painting. And this painting will have been created with many of these same images that were here. Some of them will probably have been used directly. It's absolutely fine if you don't want to do work that way. That's completely up to you. But whether you're painting them or if you're using, let's say, the photographs more directly into your image, either way, this final image is still a creative work that was a part of the research and a part of all these ideas that were discovered beforehand. You can see these rocks here from one of the reference images are pretty similar to the types of rocks that are here. So these are changed just enough in order to be different, but at the same time, they're very similar to something interesting that we can find. My point being here is that we can spend a tremendous amount of time trying to attempt to do things in a way that is just either impossible or is reserved for the very, very high level artist. If we try to draw, for instance, like Kim Jung-gi, and we don't have the decades of experience that he has, and his level of development visually, his visual library, all of those things that he has paid attention to, that he has sketched. If we just want to do what he does and we try and do what he does now, that's just not going to work for us. We need to go the long way around. We need to spend the time in practice first. So if you're continuously attempting to do work from imagination and you're insistently doing it in this certain way with no research, just purely out of your head, you might be doing something that is just unrealistic. You may be able to do that, but it will take years of training to get there. And the training is first in drawing these things that do exist, making variations on them. And if you would like to start producing higher quality work earlier on, really you need to benefit from research. You need to look at these things. You need to find something that's relevant to what image that you would like to be producing and have these things available. If you're drawing figures, make sure that you have different types of anatomy in front of you, different character types, have all of these things available. Very experienced artists will constantly be studying and restudying and have all these things available as they're doing their pieces. They don't rely on their memory. It's imperfect with all of us. If you're drawing hands, the artist will more than likely have many different hands. They might take a shot of their own hand. They might be looking at their hand as they're drawing it, as they're painting it. They will take a particular position. They will do a certain facial expression. They will try to solve all of these problems beforehand, before they get started into the creative work. They're trying to stack the odds in their favor. They're trying to win the battle before they go into it. So here is some of my early work, and I'll just show you the trap basically of trying to do stuff from imagination with no knowledge. So this is years ago. This is the no idea stage basically. So the entire first row here is just no idea, all of them. And I'm pretty sure that you can tell that this is the no idea stage. So the level of the work is quite low. At this stage, I really have no idea what I'm doing. No visual library, basically barely able to draw anything really. Now these are from a couple years later. And these are a little bit better, but still they're quite vague. These are not done with a reliable process. These are just hit and miss. And at the same time, I can tell that I'm not doing research. I can tell that there is no reference here, for instance, for the entire image, because the way that the values are set up, because of how the lighting works in this image, is just not realistic. It doesn't really correspond to what I would like it to be. If I had had a better process at the time, a better understanding of how I would go about creating an image like this, finding reference that would solve some of the lighting problems for me, that would give me a good basis to work from, they would have been better. But all of these are kind of the same problems. Hard to understand, not too sure what's going on, pretty shallow depth, so same type of problems. Now, these images from below, they're actually from the same year as these images here. So at this stage, I developed a little bit of skill. I developed an understanding of different tools, so I could use some 3D and things like that. And I'd looked at different workflows of different people, but really the process is what ended up separating these images from these. I couldn't have accumulated that much knowledge in just a few months. I remember when I was doing this image, I had reference for something that I wanted to do. I had an artifact that I was looking at, and I was just testing some things. I was just looking to change it in a small way. I had a specific goal. I had research that I'd done beforehand, and I could put it together better than just trying to do it again out of my head. This type of image, again, I had more reference. I had some reference for the lighting, so this really didn't turn out too well lighting wise, but I still was using more than I was using before. I spent more time on it. I was more deliberate with it, and it turned out better than the images above it. And then this one, same type of thing. This was supposed to be a remake of Fallout 2, of one of the beginning scenes. So I had the design for what the temple looked like. I had an idea of what I'm supposed to use. I planned my tools. I looked for reference. Now, this image still has many issues with it, but at the same time, it's way better than the things that I was able to produce just a couple months ago. And this improvement came basically from ideas. It didn't come from years of training. It just came from recombining the tools that I were using, changing my strategy. So really this was a product of a different strategy. That's the main thing that really gave me this massive boost. So that's why we call process a multiplier, because if you neglect it, even though you may be very skilled, your work may be unreliable, or it may be suffering, and the quality of it might be overall lower than what it could be if you applied proper strategy, if you planned your images, if you did research, if you rehearsed before you start, if you try and break all of those difficult things apart, do them beforehand, and then redo the entire thing together, you will always end up with a better result. So over here are skills for this level and our prerequisites. It's everything. Everything goes at this stage. So you'll be using your observational skills, and you'll be using your perspective, and you'll be using your feeling form, your internalized sense of space, so the first three over here. Then you'll have your knowledge and your design, and you'll have that combined with your inspiration, with your thinking about something, with your unique take. Essentially, at this stage, you are no longer struggling with the language. You are now fully fledged writer, and you're taking everything as inspiration. You overhear something in a bar, you use that in your novel. You have a story that happened to you 30 years ago, you're going to use that in your novel. Someone tells you a story, you're going to retell it as yours, you're going to use it in your novel. It really doesn't matter at this stage. You're grasping onto everything that you could possibly get your hands on, and you're converting that into your expression. You're making it do what you want it to do. It's serving your artistic expression. So any tool goes, any type of technique goes. It doesn't really matter at this stage. So mostly you're concerned here not any longer with all of these things are prerequisites. You're not anymore thinking about these things. You're now concerned about subject. What am I talking about? What is in this image? What is the main idea? What's the composition? How am I best going to tell this story? And it's pure image making. It doesn't really matter if you're drawing it, if you're redrawing it, if you're tracing something, if you're doing photo bashing, if you're doing 3D, if you're combining digital technology with traditional types of work and approaches. It doesn't really matter at this stage. And also, if you understand the technical side well enough, if you are understanding what is critical to show in an image, what it is that you're doing, meaning that you are drawing form, that you're constructing volumes, that you're doing all this stuff, now you can really play with some other aspects. So different styles, whether you want to do manga, anime, cartoons, realism, it doesn't really matter. If you're able to do the structure and you're able to do that type of work and the dimensional thinking, then whether you're doing superhero characters with pointy chins or whether you're doing chibi massive eyes or whatever it is that they're supposed to be called, you essentially have the freedom to do so. You have the freedom of choice at this stage. You have the freedom to decide what subject, what idea you want to portray, and you also have the freedom to then look at a style, deconstruct what's essential about it, and then just apply basically that skin over top of your language. Style is just like an accent of a language. It's not about the accent, it's about the language. So a lot of times people at the beginning stages are concerned with making a style. They want to stand out as quickly as possible, but really you stand out through the internalization and training of all of these massively difficult skills that need to go under your belt before you can have fluid expression. Fluid expression without the knowledge of language is just craziness. It's just random words. You need to have the language mastered first before you can take artistic liberties with it. And the styles are essentially just the skin. It's a skin that you apply over top of your drawing. It's certain conventions and certain things that you either put into your drawing or don't put in. It will be kind of like a style in writing where, let's say, you only write that many syllables, or you only have this many paragraphs to say something, or you can only use these types of words and not these other types of words. What still remains is the language and the rules that are underneath all that, the skeleton, the base, the structure. So painting, 3D, advanced techniques, it really doesn't matter. And at this stage, you're applying light. You can use light, let's say, to create drama or to create a certain type of mood. You can then think also of materials. You're thinking about different textures and different things like that. You're enriching. You're doing this. You're doing the subtleties, and you're noticing the critical details. You're suggesting things. You are essentially, finally, giving the illusion of as if you're looking through a window into a world that you've constructed. You want to have knights in a space shuttle? Okay, fine, do that. You want to have crazy alien cities with baby presidents or whatever the thing might be? Do that. Vegetable helicopters at this stage? Again, it's all about the ideas. Normally, when we first start as a beginner, we start with ideas we want to make. We fail a ton because the technical is just something that we haven't mastered, and then for a certain amount of time we put the ideas away and we focus on the technical side, and then it's all about execution, because without execution ideas are worthless. And then after that period of training, it again becomes all about the ideas, but you can't advance without internalizing the technical. I've worked with people before and they wanted nothing to do with the software. They would just want to be able to do their drawing or do their painting. They wouldn't want to internalize the tools. And as a result, unfortunately, they would end up spending 10 times as much time on the tools because they would constantly be forgetting where a certain key is or how to do something. So instead of just taking, let's say, 3 days to figure out how everything works and just have that not be a problem, they would over time spend far more time than that, because with each and every drawing, with each and every hour spent on drawing, they would have, let's say, 10 minutes spent on just, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? instead of just drilling the technical, internalizing it, and removing it as an obstacle. This has been my way of thinking through these levels as we've been going through them. This is how I've structured them. And at this stage, you have perspective. That's basically just intuitive at this stage, like we've discussed before. You're using drawing, painting, you're combining them together, or you're drawing as you're painting, or you're painting directly. And then finally, we have here the skill compression. And what this is that essentially you're doing 3, 4, 5 different things at the same time. You might just be making a shape, but as you're making the shape, it has 3-dimensional value to you as well. You're understanding it as more than just the flat shape that it is. Not only that, but it could also be a portion of a design. And not only that, but let's say it could be making a part of the composition of your image. You can watch any Feng Zhu video to see basically a master at work, and to see how when he's just putting down one stroke, if he's painting, he's putting down with that one stroke, it has multiple meanings. It's establishing perspective, it's establishing composition, it's establishing color palette, it's establishing design. It's a crazy amount of information that's invested in a very little effort, right? The mark of the master.